Wins, and today I'll be taking you through my brand new track Animals featuring Caitlin and Scarlett. I'm going to talk a little bit how the track came about and take you through all the different layers of the track and explain kind of about the thinking process behind it. So hope you enjoy it. Hey guys, I'm Jack Wins, and today I'm going to give you a little walkthrough of my track Animals with Caitlin Scarlett, which is out now on Axtone Records. I've had quite a few of you guys ask me to do this, so I'm finally taking you through the track. Once we've gone through it, I'm also doing a little Q&A afterwards if you have any more specific questions. So let's get to it. Let me first play you a little track again, if you have heard it before.
When I'm with you, I'm a kid, I'm an animal. Taught me how to love, where from, nothing else to do but live it up. We were kids, we were animals, running through the woods. Now I'm trying to get to you again. When I'm with you, I'm a kid, I'm an animal. Taught me how to love, where we're from, nothing else to do but live it up. We were kids, we were animals, running through the woods. Now I'm trying to get to you again. Our first love won't be our time. The first song playing in my mind. Our first love won't be our side. Now they're playing our song and it sounds like
They give you the track. So way honest this was. Caitlin came to the studio. I work with songwriters when I track together. Just come up with loads of cool chord ideas, play them to the songwriter, let him or her pick what they kind of get inspired by, and then let's start writing. And with this one, it was kind of like, you know, we picked a couple of options, and then Kate was like, "Oh, I really like these kind of chords. Can I give me 15 minutes and then see what I can come up with and then work on it?" And she literally wrote the lyrics for this literally in those 15 minutes. And I kind of, all I really want to do that stage was, okay, let's just the rock vocal and let's leave it altogether done in about an hour. Then she left, and then I was working on the actual production around it. And we recorded back, I think, in 2018, so quite a while back. It's gone through quite a lot of verse. Kind of worked it 100%. Left it alone. Back to the sense that's the best view. When you feel every day not right, it's good to work on some other music. Maybe you hear other music when you're out and about, or when you're DJing, or when you're going through promos, and that might inspire you just to kind of find that last piece of the puzzle to get it right. So as you can see, there are quite a lot of elements in it. I always try to kind of color it so it gives me a better view, because I do a lot of layering. And this was in Ableton 9. I'm now on Ableton 10, where you can kind of make groups within groups. So here there's still quite a lot of separate bass and stuff. But anyway, we got the drum and kick section. We got the bass, sub bass, the pianos, strings, vocals, arpeggiator, effects, the horn section, and a little siren at the end. So let me just turn all these off and start with the drums. And I'll just add layers by layers so you kind of get an idea what's going on. Put a little loop where everything is. So you start with the kick and the clap. Then I'll just add all the layers. So we have a little, oh, sorry. We have a little perk, clap, another top layer of the kick to kind of fill the mid-high frequency. Another little perk, got a ride, little loop, then the main hi-hat, and another ride, just to kind of fill up the space. It doesn't do that much, it's quite subtle, but altogether you get kind of a nice kind of groove going. We have another loop coming in for drums, kind of like a shaker. That's pretty much the main drum section. Well, we've got some little fills here. So listen. Cool, well let's go to the bass. The main one is this. Now with this bass sound, I actually bounced it, so I can't really show it to you, but as you can hear, the bass is kind of, when it goes from one note to the other, it kind of slides. And often you can do that within the synth itself, but when you're using maybe, if you use a sample for example, you can actually just do it in Ableton. You go to transposition and you just draw it in. So I'm just, like I said, this, I've already kind of bounced it, but I'll just do this as a little example so you can hear what. So that's all it is. And what I've basically done is whenever it moves to a different note, I find out how many more semitones it goes up from, say, the lower note to the next one up, and I just draw it in like that, whatever it is, how many semitones, and then you create a little slide effect. And it's just quite subtle. It just makes it a little bit more interesting and makes the bass a little bit more moving, especially when you just have like a held down note. It's nice to look at ways to create a bit more movement in it, otherwise it feels a little bit static. So we got the sub, then got another layer, feels a bit more of the mid frequencies, and then here there are multiple layers. So again, it just on its own is not that exciting, but again, what you're trying to do is have different layers of bass filling different spaces, and then the overall sound feels quite full. So you have the sub filling more kind of the mono low ends, and then the other ones start filling more around the 100, 200 hertz. So you get kind of a nice full sound. So when you put it in, kind of like quite dark, which I quite like because the vocals are actually quite moody. So you're trying to kind of produce a track around that kind of complements that. Then we got the pianos. This is always the thing, people always ask me, what pianos do you use? For every track it's different. As you can see, I use a lot of layers, but again, I'm doing the same thing like what I did with the bass line. I have each sound playing its own role in the overall sound of the piano. So let's start with piano 2. Okay. Just a M1, and there's, well, I mean, the processing on it is just lots of EQing. Bring out the high mid-range again, the 2 and 5K. Then I got a little compressor on it, the CLA2A. I got a Mag EQ on it. And then the rest is just automation for reverb, side chaining. And then for piano 1, which sounds like this. A lot of layers, as you can see. I'll do one by one. I love, in case you're not aware of them, the F9 well, samples. They do a lot of cool plugins, sample-based plugin for Ableton, I think also for Logic. One of the guys behind it is from Freemasons, and what they seem to be about is kind of trying to recreate or sampling old synthesizers, pianos, and just trying to recreate these old school sounds, which is really cool because it's obviously really hard to get hold of that hardware now. And yeah, they got a lot of great sounds, so I often use them. So let's just do layer by layer again, or I'll play them individually and then I'll put them together. So you got, this is the 1996 piano. You got the Ford Redwoods. And as you can hear, this is really attacky, so I've kind of cut out all the low ends. And just have kind of play that role. And then you got a Nexus. Oh, that one is not working at the moment. Don't know why. But that's the Dirty House piano. I'll put it in later again. You got F9 8-bits. A really bright one, the F9 Bright 88. And the F9 TK House, which kind of gives it more of a body. So when you put them together, creates a nice full sound. And piano 2 kind of gives it the body at the bottom. And what I always do is when it kind of hits the drop, I kind of cut out all the low ends to kind of make sure there's space for the bass. So often it will sound fuller in the breakdown, but then when it hits in the drop and the main bass comes in, I'll take the low end out. Yes, just to kind of make sure that each sound has its own space rather than it starts competing against each other. So let's put the piano in. I'll just quickly play it without first. So the low end piano, and then the main one. So that's like the main core of the song, really, because that's obviously what happens in the breakdown as well, leading up to the build up. Let's see what we got here. I think these are the pads. Yeah, so I think I bounced all these as well, but from what I remember, it was one, I think the grand piano from Nexus. I think I used a synth sound from Silent, and it's nothing spectacular, but it just kind of does the job. What you can hear is that it slowly starts to open up. I mean, it's just really basic. Just if you use the cutoff, and I probably put some reverb on it towards the end, just kind of to make it sound really big before it goes into the main piano lead. And it's also the vocals kind of starting to build up, so you kind of want to represent it in the instrumentation as well. So all those together. But as you can hear, it's that grittiness of the synth that kind of builds the momentum up. Underneath that, you got the bass. Again, I all bounced them. I don't know why. I think because when I start work on this version, what I did was I took some of one of the old projects, I just bounced them, put them in here, and then start using some of the old parts and then build a new version around it. I can't remember out of the top of my head what these sounds were. I think I might have used a Siren for one of them. One might have been sample based, where I just used a sample from one of the sample packs. But it doesn't really matter. Obviously, you might want to know where the sounds come from. I'm not trying to hide anything, but it doesn't really matter where you get the sounds from. It's just it's about when you're trying to achieve a certain sound, try to see which sounds kind of work together. I think that's the main thing. So I often use a combination of samples and synthesizing and processing them together. Yeah, and that kind of seems to work for me. So anyway, so for the low ends in that, you got this. Combining that with the pads. Then the piano comes in. And with the piano, we got like some strings coming in. Very simple help note strings. Really not much to it. It just, again, helps building up the, I guess the momentum of the track when it's kind of part of the build up before it all drops. So you just kind of keep building that tension. When you hear that together with the vocals, it will sound like this. So we put these in.
When I met you, we were kids, we were animals, running through the woods. I was from nothing else to do but fall in love. We were kids, we were animals, running through the woods. Now I'm trying to get to you again. When I met you, we were kids, running through the woods. I was from nothing else to do but fall in love. We were kids, we were animals, running through the woods. Now I'm trying to get to you again. Our first love won't be the last time. Got the first song still playing in my mind. Our first love won't be the last time. Now they're playing our song and it sounds like.
In here as well, putting all the elements in, the vocals are very much at the forefront. When you club track, there's not that much vocal. It's obviously the elements in the of the intonation that are taken, but obviously because it's a vocal that you want everything kind of complementing the vocal, so you want to make sure that there's the space for the vocal to shine. Obviously, when you have such an amazing vocal as Caitlin's, which is really powerful and really upfront, you want to make sure that nothing kind of gets in the way. So you don't want to have anything in this similar frequency that's starting to fight against it. So hence why you hear like with the pads, for instance, and the bass, everything is quite filtered out to really kind of create this quite moody atmosphere, but have the vocal kind of standing out up front. I think that's always really important when you make a record. Try to figure out what is the most important part of the record, or what's the main focus. And it could change throughout the track. You know, it could be that you have in the breakdown where it's really about the vocal, but then when it drops, it's not about the vocal at all. And then maybe there might be a lead sound that comes in and that actually takes over. Anyway, so what else we got? We got a little Appreciator. Again, what it kind of does is, like I said, it's build that tension in the build-up, because it's obviously part of the build-up. Let me just play that. See, it starts to kind of drive it. The drums coming in, the snare. Again, here later on we've got another Appreciator coming in. Again, it's just another subtle layer that kind of gives an extra drive, but also a melodic part to the records. Then we also got the horns. I'll play those. Again, quite a few layers, some coming in at different times. Oh, those actually turned off. Sorry, those two. So, what I did with these. One is, this one's more at the forefront. And you got one which is kind of more, has a longer tail on it. The long reverb. Again, I bounced these, but they're literally just samples that I found. But again, what I'm trying to show is that you might have one sound which is really at the forefront and really kind of punchy, and then you have an extra layer which is more reverby and with a little. So they're both doing their own jobs, but then together it kind of creates this kind of full sound. So this is the harsher one, and this is a bit more softer but kind of reverby. So together it sounds like. As you can hear, again, a lot of the low end is out of it. It sounds quite thin, but it's completely fine because so much other stuff going on in the track. You want to make sure, again, that it just fills that kind of mid-high frequency and gives the space to the piano, the vocal, the bass, anything else that's going on. So let me just play it first without, and then I'll just add them in. Oh, be good if it's... Again, quite subtle, feels more like a texture. But again, it's just another layer that kind of makes it a little bit more interesting than it just being a track with a bass and a piano. And it creates, still kind of keeps that dark vibe going. Last bit we have are some effects. Again, I've bounced them all, but let me just play them so you get a bit of idea what's in there. Okay, so this is just what I've done with the vocal. Just kind of looped it with kind of a white noise on top, kind of filtering in. It was quite interesting there. There's a lot of layers going on. Let me explain to you what I'm trying to do there. So you obviously have this kind of warp sound, which makes it kind of gives it this dark feeling. But there's a lot of kind of noises going on, which are really subtle, but kind of creates this kind of mood. You hear like I think like sounds like a clock going ticking. There's like some noise of kind of sound like people talking, and you kind of, in a weird way, kind of creating this kind of horror scene, if that makes sense. Really moody, because when you play it with the bass together, like a little clocking sound, just like a string there. And, you know, a good place to find these kind of sounds could be, for instance, in movie effects sample packs, or it's good to kind of look out of the usual places where you might get your samples or your sounds and trying to kind of bring that in the same way I've used certain tracks with a bit more organic sound. I might use some bird noises or little things like that. And it's really subtle in the mix, and most people will never actually hear them because there's a vocal going on top and there's lots of other stuff, but it just creates this kind of atmosphere. Yeah, and it's just these subtle elements that just makes it a little bit more interesting and different. That's kind of the aim of it. And for me, it's always, when I get to the stage when I need to add effects, I'm kind of, to a certain degree, like, oh, I'm done with the record. I've kind of, you know, done the main bit. But it's really important to spend a bit of time adding those little subtle sounds and little kind of cool bits, because it just makes your track a bit more interesting and stand out from just everything else. Well, that's hopefully the idea behind it. And then at the end, we got, I think, a little siren. As you can hear, there are two sounds going on. Again, I think there's just two samples I found. I just draw in the transposition like I did with the bass sound, where it goes from low and then kind of goes up and then stays at the note. So what I often do with samples, and that's actually what Ableton is great for, is you can kind of warp it, put either complex or complex pro and use the transposition to get it in the right key. I love that personally because it allows me, I don't really have to worry what sound I find to see if it's in the right key or not. If I like the sound, I just throw it in, get it into the right key. I can play with it with the transposition, change the melody or what pitching it does. You can just get really creative with it. And that's kind of often how I work with the bass sounds as well. You know, I might just use a sample. I think these are all bounced, but I'll just get a simpler sampler, just throw the sound in, and then maybe use another synth on top. But for me, it really helps, especially with the bass sound. When I do a sub bass, I want to have a solid sub, so I often just use a sample and then use that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what you guys all work with, but for me, Ableton is just really simple and easy to use, very straightforward. So yeah, kind of works for me. But I think that's pretty much kind of the track. I mean, I've kind of showed you all the elements. It's really not rocket science what the track is. I think the overall thing what's really important is if you work with a vocal or you just start a track from scratch, try to figure out what you kind of try to portray with the record. What kind of mood is it? Really happy or a bit more moody? Try to find some reference tracks maybe that are in a similar vibe that you can think like, oh, what have they done, or what makes their track stand out, or what is that subtle element in it that makes it really different from anything else.